Welcome to Our Montana. I'm Mike Penfold, your program host, and I'm very pleased to have with me R.L. Garritson, a fifth-generation Montanan who likes history like I like history, but I tell you what, he gets into history like nobody else does. And so I'm pleased to have you, R.L. It's just so good. I've been wanting to interview you for such a long time.
It's good to be here.
So you're fifth generation?
Yeah, on my mom's side, yeah. They, my great-great-grandparents came here from Russia in 1905, and my grandfather came from Italy in 1909. So that side of the family,
Russian, Italian?
Yeah, German-Russian. They're Volga Germans. And so that side of the family is kind of fresh to this part of the country, to the United States. But my dad's side of the family, my dad's father's side, they've all came over in the 1600s from Scotland and Ireland and England. And Dad's mother came from Minnesota in 1916, homesteaded up out of Cat Creek, Montana, north of Winnett. And then my dad's father came up from Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri area to work in the oil fields in Cat Creek in 1921, and that's where they met. And my dad was born in Cat Creek in 1923.
Well, you've done a lot of history. How did you get interested in history?
Well, I grew up Western, grew up cowboy. My grandfather, my dad's dad, raised horses, and so I've always been around horses all my life, and I loved watching the Westerns. And we used to belong to a saddle club called the Billings Mounted Quadrille up there on Coburn Hill Road, where the New Day Youth Group ranch is now. And so I grew up in the saddle, you know, and I just always loved history. You know, my mom would buy these Old West and True West and Frontier Times magazines, and I was reading them all the time. And when I got into grade school, junior high, high school, when I went to the library, those are the only books I checked out was history books of the Old West in Montana, from anything from the fur trade to the Little Bighorn and everything. I just loved history and so much, you know, and then ever since I was a little kid, I was always wearing a buckskin jacket or something like that, and then I got into shooting old-time guns, old Captain Ball revolvers and muzzle loaders, and when I was in high school, and then when I got out of high school, when I was going to high school, a lot of my friends were Crow Indian, and my dad's sister's husband was Crow Indian, and so I'd been around, you know, the Crow all my life pretty much. And when I got out of high school, I went and lived with a Crow family for several years, and pretty much assimilated myself into their culture and learned to speak Crow to a degree. I'm not fluent in it, but I eventually became fluent in the Indian Sign Language as well.
I'm going to get you to demonstrate some of that.
Okay, I'll do that, you bet. And so then, but like I said, I loved the history, and I was really getting into the history of the fur trade, the mountain men and such, and I started into making buckskin clothing.
Did you make this?
No, actually my wife bought this for me about 20 years ago.
It looks like it's had a little wear on it.
Yeah, I wear it a lot.
Yeah.
It's modeled after an 1870s cavalry officer's coat. And but I started getting really into the history of the fur trade, and then I saw reading in an old Western Horseman magazine that they had these mountain man rendezvous. So, boy, I got to go to one of these. And so in 1982, I started going to mountain man rendezvous in the area. And
very interesting.
Yeah, getting into that and learning more about that. So, but I've always loved the history of the Bozeman Trail too. I thought that was just quite a story. And I knew of the route that went through Pryor, Sawyer's Cutoff. But you did an article, and the paper did an article on you, the Billings Gazette, one time, and I saw that, and I said to myself, I knew it came by Billings, you know, and there you were talking about the trail coming right through here, and so that just intrigued me so much, you know, that even to this day I still go out and I'll drive down here to where the motorcycle hill climbs is, where they came down.
Where they came down.
Yeah, and I'll drive over to here, and then I'll cut over to Duck Creek.
Let's go walk that someday.
Oh, let's do it. Yeah. I'm for it, man.
And I tell you, you can see in the diaries where they came off that last little scary bit. And you think bringing teams of mules and horses and
oxen,
off of that, and it's those guys were pretty amazing.
Oh yeah, it was and then the drive along that river road from Duck Creek to the Clark's Fork, you're right there on the trail. You know, that's just awesome, and we're right on the trail right now.
Yeah, that's one thing that's really neat here is we're sitting right on the Bozeman Trail. Billings is right behind us here, Yellowstone River, and they came right along here and then right up Blue Creek.
Yeah.
And I understand that you've got an ancestor that was...
Yeah, my fifth great uncle, he was brother to my fourth great grandmother. His name was Andrew Jackson Hunter. And I just found him recently. I was doing some family history and seeing what other kind of connections I have out here in Montana. And you know, before that, a few years ago, I learned that I was one of my cousins was on the Lewis and Clark expedition, Sergeant Nathaniel Pryor, and who the Pryor Mountains and Pryor Creek and Pryor, Montana are named after. And
so you're a relative of Sergeant Pryor?
Yes, yeah, Sergeant Pryor. And I learned that after I was a park ranger at Pompey's Pillar, you know, for 11 years. But anyhow, I thought, well, let me see who else was I related to out here. And so I was searching another person. I was reading up on the Henry Plummer gang over in Virginia City and Bannock, and I saw that the last person that the vigilantes of that gang had hung was a man named Bill Hunter. They hanged him over on the Gallatin over by Bozeman over there. And I thought, well, man, I got some hunters in my ancestry. And so I went back to my fourth great grandmother. Her name was...
See if there's any black sheep in there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I went back to my fourth great grandmother, Sarah Hunter Robertson, and I started checking her brothers. And so I went down the line, and most all of them stayed out there back in Missouri where they were living, and except for her youngest brother. He had a really long story to him. So I started reading this. You know, he was a doctor, and he had joined the Confederate Army as a physician, and was later on captured after the Battle of Gettysburg, and was sent to prison. Then he was given the option of either staying in prison or pledging his allegiance to the Union.
Paroled him out.
Yeah, so he pledged his allegiance to the Union, and he went back to Missouri. When he got there, he found his wife was in jail for being a very vocal Southern sympathizer, and they put her in jail to shut her up, and yeah. So he got her out, and they went back. Yeah, went back to the farm, and this was in central Missouri. He went back to the farm and found the whole place burned to the ground by the Yankees.
Oh.
So he said, "That's it," and he says, "We're packing up and getting out of here." So his plan was to go to either Oregon or California.
Did he have children then?
Yeah, he did. He had, I think he had a couple daughters and a son. So they loaded up their wagons and headed onto the Overland Trail. My great-great-great-grandmother's brother was already in California. He was a doctor. He went out there on the Overland Trail in 1850, and so I think maybe he may have had plans, Andrew Jackson Hunter had plans to join him out there. So they started coming up the Bozeman Trail, or not the Bozeman, but the Overland Trail, and they were told to trade off their mules and horses for oxen because the Indians like to steal the horses, and they wouldn't steal the oxen. So that's what they did, and they came up the Overland Trail, and when they got to Richard's Bridge over there by Casper, they ran into a guy named John Bozeman, who was really talking up this new road that he had found or blazed to the goldfields of Montana or in Virginia City and Bannock. And so, at any rate, I said, hey, yeah, let's go check that out, I guess. So they joined the train that Bozeman himself was leading, and they came all the way up along the east side of the bridge, Bighorn Mountains. I'm sorry, and crossed the river, Bighorn River at that Jackrabbit Crossing over there, and then they just kind of headed in this direction, crossing Beauvais Creek, and came up East Pryor Fork to the mouth there, and then crossed Pryor Creek, which at that time they were calling the Nez Perce River, and just kind of headed in this direction, and came down right over here by the what is now the motorcycle hill climbs area.
Billy's motorcycle. There's a big, used to be a big prairie there. It's kind of parking. And
yeah, and that's where they camped.
Do you think that's where they camped? I wondered.
I think so, because they said once they got down there, they went into camp.
There or here.
Yeah.
But probably there.
Probably there, and I wouldn't doubt that trains that followed afterwards, wagon trains, camped in various spots along here. But I'm pretty sure that's where they camped originally, because it's a nice wide open area. And they said there's plenty of grass and firewood and water. And
when they looked across the valley, I saw in one of the diaries it was just loaded with buffalo.
Yeah.
Where City Billings is, they're just loaded with buffalo there.
Yeah, and
amazing.
And they many of the diary entries. That when they reached the top of the hills here and looked into the valley, they said it was one of the most beautiful valleys they've ever seen on the whole trip, you know. And but yeah, they came right down through here and crossed Blue Creek, and I kind of think they right about where the road goes up to the city dump. They might have went up that way.
I tell you, I've got a couple of spots I want to show you sometime.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think, I mean, there's nice terrain that kind of gets up on, top there. I got a hunch that's where they went.
Because they said they couldn't get past the river because of the bluffs down here.
Yeah, I got some big bluffs down
there. Yeah, and then they just kind of got up on top of the bluffs and made a kind of a 10-mile circular route back to Duck Creek, and then came down at the mouth of Duck Creek, and I think I know where that spot is.
Yeah, I'd like you to show me that sometime.
Yeah, I want your opinion on that too, because there's a spot where I think you can see wagon ruts coming down still.
I've looked up on that hillside, and I thought, I wonder about that.
I wonder.
Yeah, let's go look at that sometime.
Yeah, and then they went down 5 miles down to the mouth of the Clark's Fork and crossed right there.
And you know, BLM just acquired that. And another little piece down there, they call it Sundance. And I'm sure the trail went
right through there.
Went right through there.
Yeah.
So that's kind of another little piece of.
So they continued on their journey and met up with the Bridger Trail over there about a mile this side of Joliet, and then followed that route, and then they came down that Bridger Canyon, which was pretty rough.
I don't know why they did that.
Well, you know,
they were following Jim Bridger.
They were following Jim Bridger's trail
at that
there.
time, yeah.
And then they got down to Bridger Creek and crossed that and went down towards Springdale, and then crossed the river down there, and they camped for a day there, and that's when
at the hot springs
found the creek. He found that hot creek flowing there, and he said, well, I wonder where that comes from. So he followed it up to its source, and he said it reminded him of the hot springs in Arkansas, you know. And so I'm sure he kept that in mind, being a doctor. And then they went on to Virginia City, and there's a note in that history that I found in the family history that they stayed there for several days because somebody in the party accidentally shot themselves, and the guy died, and they buried him there, and then they continued on to Virginia.
At the hot springs?
Yeah, near the hot springs, and continued on to Virginia City.
Being the doctor, he would have
stayed.
He'd have stayed.
Yeah, and so they continued on to Virginia City, and they stayed there for about a year. Then they moved up to Helena and stayed there until 1870, and they moved back to Bozeman, and then he remembered those hot springs and filed squatter rights on it, and developed Hunter's Hot Springs, which he owned until about 1884.
So that was 18. Well, that'd been about 1870.
Yeah.
1870. Pretty wild country then.
Yeah, it was. It still was. Yeah. And
I guess it's in Crow Country.
But the Blackfeet still come through, and they said that the Sioux would come through. They weren't worried about the Crows, the Sioux that scared them.
Yeah.
And but he developed that hot springs there and built a hotel and a spa, and he owned it, operated it until about 1884, and then he sold it to somebody else. But there's a photograph of a bunch of people sitting on the porch of the Hunter's Hot Springs Hotel, and there's a picture of Dr. Hunter sitting there.
Have you got that?
I have a copy of it somewhere, but it's him sitting there. He's the older man, heavy set with a white beard.
I'll be darned. If you have that, I'd like to get it and put it in this.
You bet.
In this.
You bet. A lot of people. There was a rumor going around that this photograph was a picture of all these famous Westerners that gathered together at Hunter's Hot Springs, and saying it was Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy.
I've seen that picture.
This picture was taken in 1886, and Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid didn't even know each other yet.
Yeah, didn't quite work, did it?
Yeah, trying to say that the old man with the big beard is Liver Eating Johnson, but it's not. That's my uncle. But I was just so intrigued and fascinating that here I am related not only to a man that was on the Bozeman Trail and traveled it, but a man that traveled with John Bozeman, but also a man that left his mark on Montana history, with Hunter's Hot Springs. And
that is a wonderful family legacy, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've got a cousin that I've never met before, except we just met recently on the internet, and they live over at Seeley Lake, and she is a direct granddaughter, great granddaughter of Andrew Jackson Hunter, and so she's my distant cousin.
We need to chat with her sometime.
Yeah, I want to get together with her because I'm curious to see if either Hunter or his wife Susanna kept a diary.
That'd be good to see if she's got anything like that. Well, I tell you what, I really appreciate what you've been doing in terms of giving the Bozeman Trail some visibility. Right now we're, as you're helping us, trying to get the Bozeman Trail designated as a National Historic Trail. And really, this is a piece of history. I'm lecturing to the choir here, I guess, but that Montana can be proud of, but it really was a clash of cultures, wasn't it?
It was.
And the impact on Indian people, the wars lasted for another decade.
Yeah.
So here we sending wagon trains through areas that was the prime hunting ground of Indian people, and we also had a treaty that said, hey, we're not going to do this.
Yeah.
This is your.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was the Treaty of 1851 or 1858, was it? 51 or 58, I can't remember right now. That was actually designated as Crow grounds, Crow land.
That's right, this was Crow ground.
Yeah, even in the Powder River country. But the Sioux and the Cheyenne pushed the Crow out of there, so they kind of violated the treaty.
They did.
But then Bozeman violated the treaty as well, because whether it was Crow or Sioux land, it didn't make a difference. They were not supposed to be going through there. That's why Jim Bridger blazed his trail on the west side of the Bighorn, because he didn't want any trouble from the Indians. But it was a little harder and drier route to go.
Yeah, a little harder. What are you doing there, dog?
But it was definitely a clash of cultures all the way around. And it's sad. It's things should have been different.
Yeah.
But
well, see, we live up here in Blue Creek. We're on land that was Crow Reservation at one time.
Yep.
I'm glad to be there, but I'm sure the Crow would just soon be gone. But I don't know. And the Crow. I'm adopted by two Crow families, and the Don't Mix family and Elma Hogan Snell. And I learned so much from them, and I just love that family, both families. I've met Elma. She was so good at plant medicinal things that the Crow people used. And I guess that you've studied that too, haven't you?
Yeah. And she and I would talk about stuff like that, and she was a great woman. She also was a Signtalker as well. Her grandmother was Pretty Shield, the wife of Goes Ahead.
That's right.
A Crow Scout.
Yeah.
And I'm also adopted by a Grovon Indian family up at Fort Belknap.
So, tell me a little bit, how did you get into sign talking? How did you learn that?
Well, I started picking it up when I was living with the Crow, and because at that time there's still a lot of old timers that still spoke the sign talk. I remember out in Pryor, when there used to be that grocery store out there, seeing old timers, old Indians sitting out there with long braids, and they'd be talking in sign talk, you know, and private conversation, so they wouldn't disturb anybody else. And I thought, you know, man, that is so beautiful. I mean, you see this in the movies on TV and stuff, you know, but this was the real stuff, you know. And I realized later, after I became familiar and even fluent in sign talk, a lot of that stuff you saw on TV was fake. You know, just the director said, just move your hands around, nobody's going to know the difference. Unless it was a movie that Iron Eyes Cody worked on.
Oh, he knew it.
He knew it. And even though he was full-blooded Italian, he did much to preserve American Indian culture. But I started picking it up and learning it, you know, here and there from various Crow and Abzalaga people. And then, you know, I got to know maybe about 40 or 50 signs, but I thought it was such a beautiful form of communication that anything I could get my hands on to study it more, books, old videos, I would collect and gather, and just start researching it more, and then talking with other sign talkers that still used it, and learning more and more. And then when I became a park ranger at Pompey's Pillar, you know, all they talked about was Lewis and Clark, you know, the wonderful things that Lewis and Clark did. Well, you know, in my opinion, they didn't really discover anything. They just put it down on paper, you know, because even the French were out here before they were. And but I decided, you know, nobody was talking about the native culture. The only one that would come out and talk about native culture was our friend Howard Bogus, and him and I, we became really good friends too. In fact, I just visited him about a week ago, and at any rate, I said, I got to come up with a program about native culture. And so one program I developed was medicinal and edible plants of the native plants of the area that were used by American Indians and the mountain men and such. But I wanted something else that was more interactive. And I thought, Indian Sign Language, nobody's doing that. So I dug out all my old films and all my old books, and remembering how to do the syntax of the sign language that I learned from the Crow and other tribes. I started researching all this, and before I knew it, I had 500 signs down.
Is there that many?
Oh, there's more than that. There's far more than that. But I didn't stop at 500 signs. You see, if I was going to do a presentation, I wanted to be able to do it to where there'd be no ringer out there that's going to call me on something and embarrass me in front of everybody. And so I had 500 signs down, and that's when I started doing presentations. But I didn't stop at that. Today I know over 1,700 signs, and there's probably, with all the dialects, because like the spoken language, there are dialects in the sign talk as well, there's probably about 7,000 signs. And
oh my goodness.
But you know, 1,700 signs, that's pretty fluent.
Pretty fluent. Okay, so here, you're John Bozeman.
Okay.
We're heading towards, where were we going when he got killed?
He was coming back, he was heading to Fort Smith.
He was heading to Fort Smith, and we're sitting here, and we look over, and there's 5 Indians coming. What are the Indians saying to us?
First they're saying, catching our attention, you know, going like that. This means who, what, when, where, how, and why, depending on how you use it in a sentence. And they said, you know, go like that, and you know, probably question you name, what you called, question you called. You know, they never point at a person with their finger, with their index finger, because there's bad medicine you can zap them with. So you use your thumb. So question you called. Or they would say what tribe they were, and Bozeman mistook them for Crow at first. Yes. And the sign for the Crow Indian is you do the sign for that, for the pompadour hairstyle, or like this, but a more traditional way was bird, man, like that. And so
this is man?
Yeah, this is man.
This is man. And
depends on how you hold his finger, it means different things. So it's man, like that. And but then
they probably signaled Crow.
Probably said they were Crow. Yeah. And but then he recognized them as Blackfeet. And after he says, I've been fooled, I'm fooled, they're Blackfeet. And so Blackfeet would be, because this is black. Another way to do this sign for black is, you do the sign for color, like that. And then if you had black hair or point at something black, you'd point at that. But when the black robes came out here, the Jesuit priests, they wore those black robes. So like that, it became easier to go like that, indicating the black sleeves. So Blackfeet man or Indian, like that. And so then he recognized them as Blackfeet.
Now, RL, I see a beautiful girl over there, and I want to talk with her really bad.
Okay.
And how do we do this?
Well, you go like, question, you called, what's your name? You ask a question, you people, who's your people? Like that. And then you go like, if you want to tell her that she's pretty, you go, you face much good. Like that. So you face much good. Means beautiful. If she's ugly, face bad.
You don't say that.
No. Yeah.
You don't say that. So okay, so they're coming across Wyoming, and they see Indians up, and the Indians are signing. Obviously, they want to come down and trade and eat and so on. What are the Indians saying to?
They say, for instance, they get your attention. If they're way off, you go like that, and that gets your attention. Then they're gonna ride down, and then they're gonna.
Right.
This means ride. This means horse, but when you're going like that, you're riding. And then they go. We want food. We want trade. And then they would ask for whatever they want. We want blankets, or you'd say blankets we want in the proper syntax, because English is the backwards language. So in Signtalker, in most other languages, you would put the subject or the noun first, and then the action and the verb after. And so, trade we want. Yeah.
Do many of the Native Americans know sign language now?
Not like they used to. I probably know maybe 5 of the Crow tribe, 3 of the Northern Cheyenne. We just lost one of the Northern Cheyenne just this last year, Laretha Rising Sun, and she was deaf, and she spoke both the Plains Indian Sign Language and the ASL. For the deaf, but she preferred to speak in Indian Sign Language. There's another friend of mine, James Woodenlegs, and he's a Cheyenne. He's also deaf, and he prefers to speak in Indian Sign Language as well, though he knows the other form as well. About 12 years ago, I was hired by a linguist professor from the University of Tennessee. He was doing a project on the Plains Indian Sign Language, a digital field research project. And how I met him was I was doing some research on the Signtalker, and I found him on the internet. He wrote this book on the history of the sign language, Indian Sign Language. So I sent him an email, told him who I was and what I was doing, and he calls me on the phone and says, "I've heard of you." I said, "You heard of me in Tennessee?" He said, "No, I heard of you at the Smithsonian Institute." I said,
my goodness.
"Smithsonian? Who knows me at the Smithsonian?" He says, "The director knows who you are." I said, "Well, I don't know how he knows me, but how'd my name come up?" He says, "Well, I told him I was going out to Montana to do this digital field research project and go into the Indian reservations and interview elders that still use the sign language." And the director said, "Well, if you're going to Montana and to do that, you need to talk to Ron Garritson." And so he asked me if I'd be willing to come on their team as a guide and interpreter. And I said, "Sure." So they hired me as a guide and interpreter. We went to the Crow Reservation and also Fort Belknap and interviewed elders, and that's where I met James Woodenlegs, and I was his interpreter. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Whenever he wanted to ask somebody something, he would tell me in Indian Sign Language, and then I'd tell it to the person. Like a prime example was, we were just happened to be up at Fort Belknap at their annual rendezvous. Not rendezvous, but powwow up at Hayes, and we were guests of Gerald Stiffarm, who was the tribal chairman, and stayed in an extra lodge teepee that he had. And anyhow, Gerald came up to me and says, Ron, can you tell James something for me? I said, sure. So he wanted me to tell him that there were some other people there with the same last name as James, and he wondered if they were related. And so he would tell me that, and I would tell James in Indian Sign Language, and then James would interpret sign back to me in sign language, and then I would interpret to Gerald. And while I'm doing this, I'm thinking, well, this is kind of cool, you know. Gerald, he's a Gros-Ventre Indian, and here's a Cheyenne, and I'm the interpreter between these two tribes, you know. It was pretty cool, you know. And so I worked with that interpreter program, or research program, for 2 years. Yeah.
So, I'm thinking about Indian names. They would work better with sign, wouldn't they?
Sure.
As opposed to Michael.
Yeah.
I don't know how you would say Mike.
Well, you know, every name has a meaning. You know, even English names. If it has a meaning, you know, like for instance, Travis. My son's name is Travis. That means traveler. And so everybody's name has a meaning.
Mine is Penfold.
Penfold. Okay. Well.
Pig herder.
Pig herder.
Okay, Garritson.
There's a sign for that.
What's a Garritson?
Okay, you want the sign for pig? We'll do this. Let me take my hat off. Yeah, just put it here. Okay, now to do the sign for pig, and this is kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because we were over at Laretha Rise and Sons' place in Busby having a sign talk conference there, and they videotaped the whole thing, and they had us all sitting in these chairs, and I was sitting beside Barney Old Coyote of the Crow tribe.
Oh,
and he was an elderly man in a wheelchair, and his daughter Jackie, who's a friend of mine, rolled him up beside me, and she says, "You want me to stay here and help you?" And he goes, "No," pointed at me, "He'll help me." Okay, you know, and I only met him a few times, but I knew her pretty good.
Well, that was an honor.
Yeah,
actually,
yeah, it was. And so they would ask us how to say certain things in sign language, like Indian tribes and animals, and so they asked him, "How do you say the Cheyenne in sign talk?" And he goes, "What?" Because he couldn't hear very good. And I said, "Cheyenne." "What?" I said, "Cheyenne." He went like that again, and I said, "Sajbush," because I could speak a little Crow. I knew enough to. He's so he does the sign for the Cheyenne. And then they asked him how to do the sign. We were doing animals, and they asked him, "How do you do the sign for pig?" And he goes, "What?" I said, "Pig." "What?" I said, "Dachpicheocha." He knew what that was, you know. That's pig in Crow. And what that word is, actually two words. Dachpiche is bear, and ucha is deer. So to say pig, you go bear, deer.
Oh, big darn.
Yeah. So that's how you say pig.
So I hope, RL, that we can get this Bozeman Trail designated as a National Historic Trail.
Oh yeah. It's a long time coming.
And we've talked about, you know, this is a good tourism project too. It's kind of interesting that cultural tourists, people who are interested in this kind of history, tend to be a little bit older. They tend to have a little bit more money. They tend to be a little bit more educated. They tend to like to stay in hotels and eat in restaurants.
Yes.
So that's really a good target for us to get tourism. If people look on the web about National Historic Trails, you see there's so much there that really helps bring people into an area. And I'm particularly interested in how the Crow could be involved more deeply.
Yeah.
And it's an area that you and I need to talk more about, and with some of our Crow friends.
Yes.
There's potential there.
Definitely.
And you got the Sioux and the Northern Cheyenne, the Southern Cheyenne, Arapaho. They're all piece of their history there.
It needs to be told, all of it.
It needs to be told, and it needs to be told fairly, because it's in a way it's not a pretty picture.
No.
But
well, I was amazed. A couple of times I had gone down to Casper, to do presentations on the Signtalker for a program down there, and I stopped at their National Trails Museum there, you know, and I was surprised, why is not the Bozeman Trail represented here? And then then now that I found out that, well, it's not designated as a National Historic Trail yet.
Interesting.
So, because I thought, gosh, it started it came right over here.
Right through there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's another reason why we ought to have it designated as a national trail.
Definitely.
We're running into some problems with private landowners. Here's the problem. Is that to have a national historic trail is absolutely protects private property rights. This is not a trail that you're trying to put people on to go across. It's the history that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Not walking on the trail or getting on the trail.
Yeah.
And the National Trails Act really protects private property. When we're trying to get that idea across to people that this is not something to be afraid of.
Yeah, the government's not going to take over their land.
No, these people have the right to manage their land as they damn well fit.
Yeah, if they want to plow it up, let them plow it up.
They can plow it up, exactly. This is history, not putting a trail across. Garritson?
Well, I enjoyed that video you did on the wagon train thing, you know, and I've had so many people asking me about, gosh, could we do a wagon train event? I said, well, I tell you what, that's a lot of logistics there.
Boy, there's a lot of
a lot of work, man.
We had written consent. We didn't get denied access to one piece of private land.
Oh, that's awesome.
Except Ted Turner.
Ted Turner.
Yeah.
At
any rate,
but
everybody and people let us camp on their ground, and it was really good. People really appreciate having the Bozeman Trail on their land.
Yeah, well, and I got a friend, a really good friend of mine. In fact, I worked for him as a guide on horseback trail rides in the summer, and he's got a piece of property 20 miles east of Pryor, and a portion of the Sawyer's Cutoff cuts right through his land. Brad Edward is his name.
Brad Edward.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to introduce me.
I'm going to introduce you to him, and we've been talking about having a Bozeman Trail event, like an encampment.
I like it.
On his property, you know.
Yeah, I'd like it.
Yeah. So that's kind of in the talks. Nothing's confirmed or anything yet, but he said he's all for it. And he's a historian and a reenactor like myself too, so that's how we met.
Are there many of you that do Bozeman Trail reenacting?
You know, I don't know. I really don't know. I know there's people that live down in Sheridan and Buffalo that are into it. They're into all that history. A lot of them I know from the Mountain Man rendezvous that I've attended and such. There's people over in Miles City. They're interested in it. They're more of the military aspect of it, like Fort Phil Kearny stuff. I don't know. I think there's a few people that are interested.
Having an event might smoke that out a little bit.
Yeah.
Ron Garritson.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure talking. It's a pleasure working with you.
It was an honor and a pleasure.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to more working with you.
Hey, Garritson, you're going to run into some. Going to have you on the cutting room floor for some of this, but
yeah, wouldn't be the first time.
Thank you, John.